here on board the Princess V85 to talk about sea trials. Not so much the sort that we do when we test a boat, but the sort that you would need to do before you hand over all your hard-earned cash. Of course, there is a subtle difference. We're trying to determine absolute right and wrong. You will want to determine whether the boat suits your particular style of boating. There's actually quite a bit you can do before you go to the trouble of a seal trial. One is checking financial considerations. So for instance, who's paying for the cost of the fuel for your sea trial? If it's a new boat, invariably the dealer. If it's a brokerage boat, it's likely that you'll be asked to stump up for the fuel costs. I check the insurance position as well. Again, most reputable brokers and dealers will have good insurance which cover all aspects of the sea trial. But there may be just some brokers who are relying on the owner's insurance being a named skipper, and I'd argue that's slightly less thorough coverage. There's another really key thing you can check before you head out to sea, and that's storage. Enormous variations from different boats and different manufacturers. Not all boats are blessed with gigantic lockers like this one on the V85. But just because your boat's big doesn't necessarily mean it will have good storage. Boats are being designed in very innovative ways these days, some with pod drives at the back of the boat where the lazarette would be, and the lazarette disappears and you have a cabin in the middle of the boat, so all the storage that you had in your lazarette disappears. So it's worth taking along a list of all your big bulky items. Are you going to have one or two life rafts? Are you going to carry scuba gear, windsurfers, a big ball fender, anything a bit out of the ordinary? Just make sure it's all going to fit on board, otherwise no point heading out to sea. If you've got an engine room like this, I consider yourself to be very blessed indeed. Of course, going back to our original proposition, you're trying to find out if the boat suits your needs, not whether it's good or bad in absolute terms. So if you use your boat entirely as a weekend cottage, rarely go to sea, then this area may be completely unimportant to you. But of course, if you're using the boat on a regular basis, especially on a daily basis, then the key thing is service access. We've got a 3-tier checklist, so fairly straightforward. We've got easy access daily checks, things like oil and water of course. Then we have emergency hot engine room checks as well. These are actually really important. They're the sort of things you have to get to when things go wrong. So things like impellers, drive belts, seacocks, fuel filters and raw water strainers. And then of course the third thing is the tertiary checks, everything else, the sort of things that you have to service on an intermittent basis and still keep your eye on if you want everything to continue to be running sweetly. Something I feel very strongly about is the importance of only sea trialling a boat, if possible, with your engines of choice. The reason for this is that the nature of an engine's performance can have a huge effect on how a boat feels and handles out on the water. It is entirely possible for a more powerful engine to actually dish up a less usable performance out on the water. So if you want to avoid disappointment, and the same goes for the drive system as well, whether it be stern drives or pod drives, which you sometimes get the choice between, or even pod drives and shaft drives, only try the boat with your engines and drive system of choice. There's one more thing you can check before you head out to sea. If you drive like a nutter with the throttles nailed to the stops all the time, then it's worth contacting the engine manufacturers beforehand. Some of them have guidelines on maximum continuous cruising RPM, some have none at all, and others have, say, a 1 hour in 10 at maximum throttle recommendation. The important thing about this is that armed with this information, you can see if your boat's going to cruise at the very high speeds you're used to within the guidelines. So, you've done everything you possibly can by way of background preparation. What next? Well, our final recommendation before you head out to sea is that on the day you assemble all your regular full-time crew. Now, as you can see, not everybody has the finely honed body of a world-class athlete. So if your regular crew includes the old, the infirm, youngsters, small people, maybe overweight people, they're going to feel differently about certain aspects of the boat, particularly about moving around, negotiating narrow side decks, traversing slippery foredecks. And that climb that you thought was perfectly acceptable up to the flybridge may, for some, be like scaling the north face of the Eiger. So on the day, take all your regular crew if you can, so you can mimic as closely as possible your normal day's boating. How easy or difficult it is to moor a boat is one of the things it's quite easy to assess on the day of sea trial. Simply a matter of going through the motions. So instead of letting the salesman do all the work and make it look very easy by hiding all the difficult bits, why not grab a fender and head down onto the bathing platform or the side decks yourself. That way you're really going to get a grip on how easy or difficult everything is. Movement around is the key, of course. If it's safe and easy to move around, plenty of grad rails, wide side decks, easy boarding from the bathing platform, that can make things an awful lot easier when it comes to mooring. Checking for levels of noise and vibration is a straightforward process as well. What you need to do is sit a crew member in all the vital areas, in the saloon, up on the flybridge, in the cockpit, and if you're a long distance cruiser where you cruise overnight, then put someone in the cabins as well. Then try and make sure that the engine revs are synchronised, because that helps cut down on the noise and vibration. And then slowly run the boat up and down the rev range, listening for what is acceptable to you. There's no absolute right or wrong, just what you're comfortable with. Some boats have unusual resonance from the exhaust at particular running speed, so it's quite important to run close to your normal cruising speed, because that's the time you're going to be running most often. Like pretty much all the Princesses we test, this V85 has a really cracking helm position. Of course, back to that horses for courses thing, if you're going to use your boat entirely as a weekend cottage, then maybe this doesn't bother you. But if you enjoy the driving experience like I do, especially in rough weather, then this is a key area. I think the easiest thing to do to assess the driver's lot is to simply take along a checklist. Maybe that different things on your list have different priority, but at least you'll be able to determine whether the boat is good enough for your needs. Our checklist would typically comprise aspects of visibility and operation of the controls, so ergonomics. Things like, are the wipers long enough? Are the screens tinted? You know, if you plan on cruising at night, tinted screens are going to dent your night vision. Check for little details as well, things like ventilation, whether there's opening side windows or opening doors or an opening sunroof, so you can circulate fresh air, keep the driver alert. The whole question of handling and performance and comfort, especially in a seaway, is a very subjective area. I think the key thing is to make sure you don't head out for 20 minutes, turn around and come back in the opposite direction. So try and drive the boat on all points, so upwind, downwind, inner beam sea, inner quartering sea. And vary your speed as much as you can as well on all those points, just to get a feel. Boats can have weak spots and strong points as well, depending on what type of hull it is, whether it's a planing boat or a semi-displacement boat or a multi-hull. So try and make sure that the boat suits your particular needs. There are a couple of things you can check which are perhaps a bit less subjective. One is low speed manoeuvring. And do be aware that some dealers won't be very happy about letting you take a boat at close quarters, but certainly try and get a feel for how powerful the bow thruster and stern thruster is, especially if you've got a very tricky mooring. The other thing you should check is the trim tabs. Depress one trim tab fully just to see if you've got adequate tab to level you in a seaway in a crosswind, and then press both down as well to see if you can get the bow down for driving upwind in lumpy conditions.